You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word.
My guest today is Anne Melinger, CEO and owner of Bink. Anne is an internationally recognized expert in organizational culture, employee engagement, and change management. As CEO and owner of Bink, she leads a team of senior advisors dedicated to helping companies build high-performing cultures that align with business strategy and fuel organizational performance. With more than 25 years of experience, Anne and her team help fast-growing organizations navigate periods of transformation while aligning and strengthening the cultural foundations that drive innovation, retention, and competitive advantage. Prior to Bink, Anne worked in some of the world's largest communications agencies, including Golan and Fleischman Hillard, advising dozens of global organizations. A graduate of Syracuse University, go Orange. Today, Anne is a proud 25-year resident of New York City. Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate being a guest.
I'm happy to have you here. I'm afraid I did not do the Go Orange anywhere near justice in that introduction.
It was a great effort. We'll take it.
As I'm doing it, I'm thinking, like, is there an inflection, a hit, but at any rate, I'm really excited to have you here. You and I met through kind of a series of folks who knew each other all at once, and I've had even folks since we met say, like, oh, you know who you should hook up with is Anne Melinger. And I'm like, guess what? I already know her. And it's wonderful. So really happy to have you here on the show. Can you share, we heard kind of some of the broad strokes of sort of your origin story, but can you share with us a little bit about how you got involved in communications and the kind of shift in emphasis in more recent years to culture specifically?
Sure, absolutely. So in high school, I really had a big dream of being in broadcast journalism. My school had a broadcasting team. I was the head of the team. We had a TV show that was on local cable access.
Oh, wow.
So I loved being in communication from a very early time. I knew I wanted to go to college to study communication, which is how I ended up at Syracuse, but very quickly pivoted away from broadcast journalism when I saw how difficult and cutthroat that particular area of communication was, and moved into PR. But I also had a double major in policy studies. And throughout my time at Syracuse, I really enjoyed sort of the connection between both public relations and public policy, and really thinking about how to move people, how to understand what people's priorities, challenges, concerns were, and to move them along, and to also influence change. And I graduated at a time when the economy was really strong, and I had the confidence of a 22-year-old to, really apply for a lot of different types of jobs. But what I found an agency that had a division that was focused on employee communications and change management. I sort of just stumbled upon it, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like something that really appeals to me. And I just kind of went in there, bulldozed with my 22-year-old enthusiasm, and just said, please, 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 I would love to come and work here. And eventually they decided to bring me on board. And it was an incredible experience and opportunity to learn from some really senior level folks about the field of employee communications and change management. And I fell in love, and it's what I've been doing ever since. I love sharing that because I think most people that end up in the employee comms and engagement space sort of find it through, they spend some time in PR or, public policy, other areas. But I was really fortunate to land there right out of college. I've always been on the agency side, as you mentioned in the introduction. It's just something that I really love. I do wonder if I'll ever make it in-house, but I really, really enjoy being on the consultative side. I like the variety of seeing lots of different kinds of companies and similarities in the challenges they face, but also the uniqueness of every company and every leader and every culture. I freelanced for a period of time when I first had kids, which was another real highlight of my career. And a colleague of mine founded an agency at that time. It was called Brilliant Inc. and brought me on board to sort of help her build it, scale it. And a few years later decided she wanted to go in a different direction. And I ended up taking over the business from her. That was about 10 years ago that I've been now leading my own business. And in that time, in the last decade or so, we really evolved from being exclusively focused on internal communications as a practice to a more holistic, high-level view of engagement, alignment, and ultimately landed on culture as kind of the unifying concept, really, that brings together the different areas of expertise that we have, which include employee communications, change management, but also really understanding how HR and leadership fit in to really drive overall business performance. And so that's where we are today. We rebranded, renamed ourselves Bink, sort of simplified our name, and simplified our focus to really hone in on culture as a driver of performance.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that journey. And it was interesting to me when you talked about being the policy major, because what I thought is that through line of influence, and that's the word that really comes to mind for me, right?
Yes,
It's, I think, internal communications as well as policy is a lot more about influence than a customer conversion, right? And like, we got them to do the thing, we got them to download the white paper, or we got them to buy the product or become a customer. It really is about this kind of sweeping change that happens a little bit at a time and trying to generate momentum. Um,
exactly.
yeah, curious if you think there's any like particular reason that that was really appealing to you, since it seems like a through line.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of reasons. First of all, Syracuse just has a really incredible program around public policy. And so as I was hearing about it and seeing it and hearing about the classes there, I just fell in love and have stayed connected with a lot of the classmates and professors from that program. It was really fantastic. And I think it's also sort of the desire for meaning. You know, there were some things within public relations that felt a little, they just didn't really speak to like the core of who I was and what I wanted, which was to really make a difference in the world. And that's not to say that people that work in PR can't make a difference, but I think there was some of that was missing for me. And that was what really the public policy and policy studies provided. And again, I think it's another reason why I was really drawn to the employee space. It's so relatable, right? Every single one of us has had a job at some point. Even, you know, those of us who are lucky enough, like you and I, to be our own bosses now, at some point in our career, we all had jobs, you know,
Oh, yes.
probably back, my first one back when I was, 14, 15. And we can all understand what that's like to be an employee, to be in a space where you're not in full control, when you don't have full autonomy over everything that's happening, and really just wanting to make that experience better for people to any extent that I could. So I think it was really that the essence of making a real difference was what spoke to me in public policy.
Awesome. And I don't want to give too much away on the culture side of the conversation, because I know we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But it is interesting for me to hear about that kind of decision to go upstream a little bit, right, of communications, and say, okay, like, well, what is impacting communications? It's the culture that really kind of is the driving force there. I
Exactly.
know today Bink has an emphasis, although maybe not an exclusive client base, on life sciences. So tell us a little bit more about those folks, and maybe are there unique challenges in that sector that those
Oh, yeah.
companies are facing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many unique challenges to that sector. It's an area that I have been focused on throughout my career from a very early time. Really understanding that companies in pharma and biotech, listen, all companies have unique characteristics with their employees, but there's something about that industry that has always spoken to me. First and foremost, again, it's that idea of like really making a difference, right?
Yeah.
We often joke that in communications, it's not saving lives. We're not doing brain surgery. But when you think about life sciences companies, they truly are doing life-changing work. And that alone was enough to really draw my attention. But what's super interesting to me about life sciences companies is the diversity of employee type. Within a pharmaceutical company, for example, you have a huge number of pharmaceutical sales reps, which are such a unique audience in and of themselves. And in that same company, you have scientists. And in that same company, you have folks that are focused on regulatory rules and working with the FDA. And those three alone, and that's just three of like the big audiences, are so vastly different, completely different personas, completely different ways of processing and receiving information. Some sit at desks, some some drive around and call on doctors, some work in a lab. And that dynamic employee environment has always been really interesting and exciting to me. What a challenge to be able to communicate and engage people that are so vastly different, but all working toward a common goal.
Yeah, I definitely echo what you've said. We do some work with life sciences companies as well. And I'll sometimes talk about how I grew up in a family of pharmacists.
Hmm.
So and I have other medical relatives. My sister's an oncology nurse practitioner, and there are other pharmacists in my family. And I was always like the artsy one, right? Who
Right.
was like, I could not dissect a frog. So I was like, medicine is not my calling. And yet these people in my life are doing so many important things. And so to kind of come back and be able to work in that space, but sharing my talents and my skills to support those goals has been really, really cool and very rewarding for me, actually. I feel like, I can contribute in a sort of like less conventional pathway. Um,
Exactly.
so you mentioned the kind of vastly different audiences. I'm curious, like, generally how you think about that kind of an approach. Are you always looking to segment and create multiple communication streams? I mean, that may work for certainly really, enterprise level companies, but I
Right.
imagine at a smaller level that could get unwieldy. So how do you think about kind of dealing with that unique challenge of the kind of composition of the employee base?
I think I'll give the classic consultant answer. It depends,
Yeah, oh,
because
absolutely.
it really does vary within the realm of life sciences, right? You have massive pharmaceutical companies that have been around for 100 years or more, and then you have new fast growth biotechs that are, just building their employee base. And I really love working with those earlier stage companies
Mm,
because I think that's where you can really get in on the ground floor and focus on the foundational messaging, narratives, and stories that are going to create that strong foundation to build upon. And that as you grow, as you have new employees come in and join, as you have employees increase their tenure, having that sort of like consistent foundational messaging is so important. And what we see when we work with some of those larger companies is that if that foundation is not right, if you don't have a clear vision or clear values or a clear strategy that's understood across the organization, it's much harder to change that in a larger organization, right? It's like steering the Titanic versus a smaller company. So I think a lot of times with those smaller, earlier stage companies, we're really focused on let's get the foundation right so that as you're building and growing, you have that strong base there. In the more complex, large, established organizations, that's when we really do often need to go into things that are a little more nuanced, more segmented, really breaking things down depending on are we specifically focused on the launch of a new drug or of a new therapeutic area? And different audiences need to have different levels of understanding. Certainly, if you're a salesperson and you're carrying a new product in your bag and you need to be able to talk about it, that's a different level of understanding than maybe somebody that sits in finance or marketing that needs to have a general awareness or a more broad understanding of this is who we are and this is a new direction for where we're going. So it really is a bit of both. It's that
mhm.
the foundational messaging that needs to resonate across the board, along with how do you focus on, targeting it for the different audiences within the organizations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I think as we'll get to, like, I think the most important thing about any good initiative is that it's something that's actually sustainable for the organization. So if you build it too big, uh,
Absolutely.
it's not going to run after you leave, no matter, how wonderful the ideal structure is. Um, I I imagine that culture, and I can probably speak from my own experience as a business owner too, even with a smaller team, um, those kind of initiatives, and I've seen it in other companies, are the tend to fall into the nice to have category, but the we get pushed to the back burner, uh, you know, um, revenue, revenue, revenue. And I know we're going to get
Yes.
to talking about culture as a business performance lever shortly, but even before that, I'm wondering, are there specific inflection points where the pain is kind of too great, where you typically see companies really recognize the need for some kind of shift or stronger definition in their culture?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, again, I mentioned this before with those earlier stage companies. I love getting in to work with them on their culture before something is broken,
Oh, yeah.
before there's a problem.
What
That's
an
the dream,
idea.
right? Yeah, that's the dream. But I think very often what we see is there are some key inflection points. I mean, typically a period of rapid growth is a big one, right? You're bringing in a lot of new people and you really want to make sure that there is clarity around the culture. So again, who are we hiring? What are we looking for? What kinds of people are going to thrive here? Having that clarity as you're going into a period of growth. Having new leadership is really important. Obviously, a culture is so much more than the CEO, but the CEO has a huge impact and has to have a huge impact on what the ideal culture is. And so, new leadership is another big inflection point, as well as any sort of like big change in strategy. Like I said, a new therapeutic area, a big merger, a big change in we are now going to be doing this other thing in addition to what we've been doing for the last 50 years. Those big changes are moments when you really need to pay close attention to the culture and make sure that you are taking those really proactive steps needed to both protect it, build it, and sustain it.
Yeah, we actually have a client who, um, one of the kind of things they're facing, I won't even say is challenging in their business, it's just a consideration, is that they've doubled in size. And so, some of the key executives who used to know every person in the organization by name and know all about them, and I think a lot of the culture was sustained through that network of relationships, find themselves in a position where that's just not it's not possible anymore. you know
Exactly.
they could walk around the office all day shaking hands and talking to people and doing nothing but that and still not know everybody in the organization in that way. So they're needing
Exactly.
to look for other channels and opportunities and ways to build uh, trust and those relationships and communicate ideas, but have to build something a little bit more scalable than kind of a personality or like one-to-one relationship driven culture.
Exactly. And I think the other point when you're growing very quickly is that in the absence of doing something very intentional, people just bring in where what they know. They
Yeah.
bring in their past experiences. They bring in, oh, this is how I assume everything works because I was at my last company for 10 years or 5 years and that's how it worked there. So if you don't take that really intentional, purposeful approach to culture, then people are just going to bring in whatever they think or what they've experienced. And before you know it, you have sort of this very blurry, hard to define culture that's not what leadership intended or wanted.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm curious in terms of thinking about maybe the last 5 years or so, kind of post COVID, and we've certainly seen a lot of changes in the ways of working, go fully remote, then hybrid, more and more return to office right
Yeah.
now. I'm curious what you see kind of in terms of trends, if there are sort of macro challenges, aside from an individual company's kind of own milestones or inflection
Yes.
points, as you talked about. Tell us what you're seeing in the landscape more broadly.
I mean, the number one most consistent thing that we're seeing across every company, every industry, every size business is just the nonstop volatility, right? I mean, it's everywhere.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
everywhere. It's there. It's in the political environment. It's in the weather. It's in the business environment. It's in the market. It's everywhere. And I have long believed that culture and some of the really core components of culture, like our mission, our vision, our strategy, our values, those are the things that can really provide stability. When people are just all over the place and feeling like I'm standing on quicksand, nothing is firm, you can provide some stability. And it's those things that really then help kind of stabilize people so that when everything is changing, like let's not even kid ourselves. Like there will be no more moments of calm. Like I think we just kind of have to accept this is the new reality. Things are going to be changing fast, furious, rapidly. What can we do to provide some sense of stability in that moment? And I think that's really where some of these foundational core ideas around defining what culture means, defining who we are, why do we exist, where are we going, what is our purpose, those things can provide that level of stability when so much is all over the place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I spent many years working alongside a management consultant and kind of helped build the framework for how the business consults other companies. And, in that core values piece, the idea that core values, for example, like really lead the way in decision making and that they become this
Yes,
lens. And so it's not so much that the decisions being made are predictable anymore or are known, but
exactly.
the ability to kind of pull back and say, uh, okay, this is how we decide what's right and how to move forward and what's the best for us overall. Because it is easy to get caught up in the I'm already behind. We have to be chasing the next best thing. And that is, you know, yeah, definitely destabilizing, like both personally and for an organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. Anything else you're seeing trend wise or any interesting opportunities that you think are on the horizon, maybe because of everything being in flux constantly?
I do think that this concept of culture is starting to I'm finding that I'm having to make the case for its importance less and less, right?
Okay.
You look at culture is being talked about on the cover of the Harvard Business Review. It's being discussed in the C-suite. I think for a long time I felt I've had to stand on a soapbox and yell into the void. Culture is important. It's not ping pong tables and pizza on Fridays. And I think that we are starting to see a shift that more and more leaders are getting that. There are more and more CEOs talking about it, recognizing the importance of it. And so that is definitely a shift in the positive. I still think there's a long way to go in terms of understanding what to do about it, but I think more and more leaders are starting to see like, okay, this is actually a differentiator. There is also plenty of research to back that up. There's data now, there are, huge studies that are able to show that companies with a strong culture outperform companies that don't have it. And so I think that that has been a shift that I have really enjoyed seeing in the last, 5-10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great segue into our one big idea, which is this conversation about culture as something that's quite intentional, and as we said, like a business performance tool. Um, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that transition. That phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast has been around a long, long time and it gets
Yes.
thrown around a lot. But what I'm guessing is that we don't historically, maybe companies don't always act upon that. Or like you said, there's the kind of the trappings of a culture. So tell us a little bit more about why it's not ping pong tables and free snacks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think culture is often seen as, something a little amorphous, something that just happens, right? It's something that, especially if you're leading a company that's been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you might think the culture was something that was established when the company was built in someone's garage and that was the culture back then. And it's just kind of evolved and it's out of our control. It just is what it is. It's in the ether. It's in the hallways or on the Zooms. It's just there. And we know that to not be the case. You can shape culture. And in fact, you must, because if you don't, it will exist. Every company has a culture. We all know that, again, from all the places we've worked, right? Every company has one. They're all different and unique. But the companies that have the strongest cultures that really do drive performance, they are being intentional about it. They are looking after it just as much as they're looking after product development, just as much as they're looking after their financial metrics. They're also thinking about and being really intentional and proactive about culture. It's not something that they're just kind of letting happen.
Yeah. What are the kind of key tent poles of like how does someone know, right, that they've done a good job defining their culture? Is it I have core values? Is it uh employees give us a high ENPS score? Like what are the kind of tangibles that people can hold on to? Because as you said, culture can kind of be a vibe, especially if it's
Yes.
undefined.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was the very first thing you said, and it's the place that we often start. It's by talking to your people. And it's by really understanding, not just are you happy to work here, but really do you feel a sense of connection, of understanding? Do you understand who we are? Do you see that your job is connected to the overall direction of where the company is going? Do you feel equipped to make decisions when things are chaotic and volatile? Those kinds of questions, as well as, really looking at some of that people data. How is your retention, turnover, things like that? How long does it take you to hire people? Some of those people-based metrics, that's the place to often start. But I think one of the other really important factors that we encourage companies to take a really hard look in the mirror at is at leadership. Does your leadership team have a clear picture of what the ideal culture is? And is there clear alignment on that? We all know from our work that when you have a C-suite that is the CEO maybe thinks one thing and their direct reports think something different, and then their direct reports think something different, things tend to fall apart. So very often we say you need to start at the very top of the organization and make sure that your CEO and the C-suite has a clear understanding of this is the ideal culture for this organization. And we're all aligned in why that is important. We're all aligned on how to get there. And we agree and understand that there's a gap between where we want to be and where we are today. That is typically the most important and often the most difficult piece to get moving on, is really understanding and aligning leaders.
And then I imagine once you've gone through the difficult work of aligning them, they have to figure out how to embody that culture, right? It can't be do as I
Exactly.
say, not as I do. Um,
Exactly.
what are are there kind of key actions you've seen consistently that leaders can take to sort of like make culture visible or be a great role model for the rest of the organization?
I think it is really taking the time to recognize and care about culture and to understand that those things like mission or purpose, vision, or, long-term strategy, values, those are more than just check the box activities. Those are so much more than words that hang on the wall. Those are the things, as we said earlier, that really provide stability and guidance to your people to make sure that when they're being hit with questions on the fly, that they are making decisions in a way that is aligned with what you want. A lot of times I think of what we do as communicators and as culture keepers. We're not necessarily there to be like a mouthpiece of leadership, but we're there to be translators. We're there to say, okay, this is what you want. This is where you want to go. Our people are over here, and we are the ones that are actually bridging that gap between what leadership wants and hopes and what employees are experiencing and feeling. So if we can get really clear with you, leadership, on this is why this company exists. This is where this company is going in the next 5 to 10 years. This is how we're going to get there, right? That's those values. And then now let's look at the strategies and the behaviors and the actions that we can take to both demonstrate to our people that that's our beliefs, and then help everyone align around that. So where you can get alignment, where you can have clarity from leadership at the top, and then have the rest of the organization kind of align with that, that's again where you have that real strong, stable organization that's able to make progress no matter what is chaos is happening in the world and in the market.
Yeah, I love that. And I know I've got a quote from you here or from Bink about the best cultures being intentionally designed, reinforced through communication, and sustained by systems that work. So maybe we can shift a little bit into the reinforced through communication piece, because I think sometimes what I've encountered is if if there's a culture problem, it sort of automatically becomes a comms problem.
Right.
And we need more emails or different internal social media or something like that. But what you've really highlighted is that the communication obviously has its own strategic thinking around it, of course,
Yes.
but it is also outflowing from the culture that is being set at the top. And I know, there's one example that comes to mind. I was working with a client, and this was for external facing marketing. And they were talking about something very specific to their industry. And they said, like, well, what do you think? Like, how do you think we should kind of position this? And I was like, well, what do you think about it? Because there's no point positioning it a certain way if your
Right.
opinion as someone who's really kind of driving the organization's point of view feel differently. Like whatever you think, I'm sure it's a opinion from an expert based on a lot of perspective, experience, your unique point of view on the world. Like that's what we should be talking about, not worrying about sort of like what's going to play best. So I'm
Yes.
wondering if you can kind of speak to that on the internal comms side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it, again, it goes back to it's exactly what you said. Some of it is, I think when I think about my skills as a communicator, yes, it's storytelling, writing, speaking, putting words together in ways that people can understand and resonate with. But if you don't have that clarity and alignment to begin with about who are we and where are we going, the words are going to fall flat, right? So once you've sort of built that, clear understanding of your people, you've done your employee research, you have the leadership team aligned, you do actually, I am still a very strong believer that the words do matter. You have to have a clear narrative. You have to have real clarity about who are we, where are we going? And to some extent, that is the words. It's getting
Yeah,
the words right. It's the
absolutely.
stories. And, those things become foundational. And then from there, you can feed into, okay, what's the strategy? How do we get people on board? And it does become frustrating. We're working with a client right now that's going through a major tech transformation. Huge. It's changing everything, the way every single person inside this organization is going to work. And the leadership team is like, we want people to feel excited about this and create a sense of FOMO. What are some tactics that we can create a sense of FOMO? And it's like, you've jumped past the entire, the bigger question of why are we doing this? Why is it going to make a difference? To get people excited about it, it's not having, bagels in the lobby or prizes for, completing a task. If that strategic definition is missing, then all the tactics in the world are simply going to fall flat. So it's so back to basics. It's so back to, you've got to have a clear strategy and you have to have a clear story behind it before you jump to tactics.
That's so interesting you say that. And absolutely. And it makes me think about kind of that earlier thing where we were talking about segmentation in a different way. I've had
Hmm.
multiple conversations with clients who are either very heavily involved in digital transformation themselves. Obviously, AI is top of mind for so many people. So many, many, many companies are undergoing more
Huge.
technology transformation than they've experienced in decades, right? And
Absolutely.
and thinking about not just what is somebody's role, but also the like adopters curve, right? And that you can't, it's probably not realistic to expect everyone to be the early adopter who's like, let me dive in. I love change. I can't wait. I want the latest and greatest. Most of your people are hanging out somewhere in the middle, right? And maybe depending on your culture, they could be, maybe they lean more early adopters, maybe they lean more laggards, like at the back of that curve. But you, I think, have to find ways to acknowledge that kind of segmentation, which is more like psychographic,
Absolutely.
and that not everyone is going to be the first to jump on board, and that's okay. It's to be expected that that kind of goes across like a bell curve.
Absolutely. And I think that's a real superpower of us as communicators is understanding that, is understanding our employees. We do it better than anyone else in the organization. We sit in a place where we can really understand the different nuances. And to your point, build and design strategies that are going to, a lot of times with technology adoption, we want to find the bridgers, the people who, if I adopt it, 90% of the people around me are more likely to adopt as well. So let's make sure we're targeting those people. So really, tapping into those superpowers of understanding our audiences and building strategies around it. The number one thing that I advise to communicators when you're working with your leaders is just get them to steer them away from the tactics. Try to really keep them focused on the strategy. We'll figure out the tactics later, but if we can make sure we have a clear story, a clear narrative, a clear understanding of our audiences where we need them to go, the rest will be easy. We could do that all day long.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then this last piece that I think you and I both share some passion around is systems, right?
Yes.
Systems so that when you all move on from an engagement, everything continues to have the impact that you intended. Um, Talk to me a little bit about systems around culture and communication. What does that look like? What challenges do you face in kind of setting those up to last inside companies?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I often say when we're working with a new client, I like to think of us as like the special forces team where we parachute in, we help you for a little while, and then we get you set up and we leave. Our goal is to get in and get out and to really set you up to make this something that is sustainable. And as we were talking about earlier, to make your culture something that's going to stick as you grow, as you change, as you continue to operate in a volatile environment. And those systems exist both on it's basically anything that touches the employee experience. And so that's really where this convergence of communications and HR really comes into play. So to some extent, the systems and processes are around, how do you communicate? What are the tools and channels that you have in place to reach different parts of the organization? How are you using them? But it's also, I think this is where that partnership and collaboration with HR is so important because it's also about how are our people being measured? How are they being promoted? How are they being recognized and celebrated? How are they being welcomed into the organization? So
Yeah.
we often talk about the life cycle of the organization. And when we're thinking about how to sustain a culture through programs, you want to look at every single one of those touch points from actually pre-hire. What do people see and hear and feel when they come across our company at a job fair or on a website or on LinkedIn? What are they seeing? Is the culture really coming through there? And that's a great place for communications and HR to partner, right? We are the storytellers, the message keepers. Let's look at some of those things that maybe don't typically fall within our purview, like talent acquisition. That partnership between comms and talent acquisition is so powerful because then you're really setting a clear message before people even join around here's what to expect here. You're doing some of that self-selecting, right? The way that Syracuse University promotes itself is very different from the way Oxford or Harvard does. And that's okay. They're not for everyone. And I say that to companies too. You're not for everyone. And then, keep going. What does the interview process look and feel like? What is onboarding? Are we using onboarding as such a great opportunity to really reinforce culture? How are we measuring progress? What competencies do we have? Are our competencies tied to our values? Again, that's another area when I say competencies that just like screams HR. But for comms folks too, there's a really powerful way that we can make those connections back to the core values of the
Hmm.
company and really understand that you're being measured based on how well you are making decisions in alignment with, who we are in the essence of where we're going. So it's really that powerful bringing together of communications tools and systems and channels along with HR and people processes that really keeps the culture sustained over time.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, my company is off and on used scorecards, right? And so we're a
Mhm.
company that's very focused on quality. We have things like details matter. It's interesting to navigate. I think quality and speed are like two very kind of easy things to view in opposition to each other. And yet,
Yes,
I think especially in an agency environment, like we both know that like you have to give consideration to both and thinking about how you kind of
absolutely.
like toe that line of, yes, I need a certain level of efficiency, but not in a way that compromises quality because that's really, values driven. Efficiency, though, is what makes the business run. And so that's got to be a part of it too. So, yeah, I think it's easy to by if you're not thinking about all those touch points, inadvertently send signals counter to what you're sort of saying, right? Um,
Exactly.
and I'm thinking about, you talked about comms and HR, but then even leadership as well, of making sure that they're delivering those all hands messages, that they're reinforcing core values, that they are, again, like living it as their own examples. Um, Again, we have a tiny organization, and I found it feels silly and forced at first to be like, oh, you're really living extreme accountability, but at the same time, like repetition is an important tool in
Absolutely.
in learning.
Absolutely.
My father worked in a large healthcare system, and I remember when he was there, he's retired now, but he was like, every employee knows our core values and can recite them. And
Mhm.
is that in and of itself a sign of that every employee is going to act on those core values? No, but also maybe, it's a sign of
Exactly. It's certainly
something.
part of it. You're not going to act on it if you don't know them.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, it's both. It's both. And it's also then understanding, well, okay, let's say one of our core values is accountability. That word means lots of different things to lots of different people. It makes some people feel really icky, and it makes other people feel like, duh, of course I'm accountable. And so it's really also digging into the meaning of the word and how it
Yeah.
feels to your people, and, test it out, talk to people, do some focus groups. Sometimes accountability might not be the right word, but we know what you want to achieve. Maybe you can achieve it through a different word. We also like to do, especially with core values, a lot of things like scenario exercises. What does this actually look like when you're faced with a decision, and bring them through different decision exercises of really seeing, okay, how might I have decided to do this differently? Or how might I address this problem through the lens of this value? So that they really get that practice, so that, again, when you're faced with some volatility or some thing that's going to come at you and you don't have time to stop, you don't even have time to ask your manager, you're just going, that you're equipped to make that decision very quickly. And to your point, you've got to at least know the words. You've got to
Yeah.
at least know them. It goes beyond that, but that's certainly a start.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about kind of these three phases of designing the culture with intention, having the right communication strategy to get that culture out, and then the systems to keep it running. Let's kind of circle back to the results of all of that. And you talked about culture as a business performance lever. What are ways that companies can measure or think about that? Like, how do they see the impact in terms of, I guess, a tangible, or is there like a financial ROI that you're able to attach to that for them?
It's such a great question, and it's like the most classic question that has been grappled with in our industry for my entire career.
Sure.
There's never one big answer, right? There are research and studies out there that can show a link between having a strong culture and business results, but I have yet to meet a company that will say, we're going to link our internal communications metrics to sales. It's just not a one-to-one. It goes back to that idea of a dashboard, of having various things that you measure. I think one of the most powerful measures is alignment. I think that is something that is not looked at nearly enough, that, when you have employees that understand and can align behind a common vision and strategy for an organization, that can really drive fast decision making and innovation, because that's really, the thing that we're looking for in this environment, is really like speed and being able to come up with good solutions, under pressure. And I think, again, having that real clarity so that you can do that is really important. So measuring alignment, and that's something that is not just done through surveys. You have to talk to your people. It goes back to exactly where we started, which is understanding your people, doing focus groups, having conversations. And again, this is a communicator superpower. We are not only good at talking, we are really, really good at listening. And so just really listening to the organization, observing, are people feeling a sense of clarity? I don't think that it's realistic to feel that people are going to feel stable. I just think, again, with
Mhm.
that sense of stability is pretty much out the window. Even at the most stable long-term organizations, nothing is guaranteed anymore. So stability is not necessarily what we're looking for, but at least having a sense of alignment, a sense of understanding a purpose, a sense of understanding where we're going and how I'm supporting that. That to me is one of the most powerful metrics you can look at.
Yeah, I love that. Um, I'm curious if are companies ever able to really tie, because again, it goes back to our first part of our conversation. This is soft kind of influence, and I don't say soft in any derogatory way, but it's
Yeah,
influence, not conversion points.
right.
I can't snap. Um, I like
I
to
heard it. That was pretty
pretend.
good. I heard it.
Thank you. Um, are they ever able to say, like, we're seeing increased efficiency, or I imagine retention is valuable, another metric in addition to alignment. Um, but does that alignment ever result in, our throughput is higher, or employees are kind of getting more
It
done, or
can. It all goes back to also how sophisticated the company is in its
sure.
measurement. One of the things though that I often try to emphasize is that companies can get really hung up on this. How are we going to measure our success? And we need to put all different kinds of metrics in place. And you can get so paralyzed in it that you end up doing nothing. And so I would much rather see an organization take action. Let me tell you, if you get your leadership team aligned around a clear message and story, and you build messaging and strategies and tools to bring that to life through systems and programs in your organization, you're going to move the needle. There's no question. And so I would much rather see companies take some action and see some incremental improvement than to do nothing. So the measurement piece is important. I would never dismiss it. Research and metrics are hugely important to knowing if our work is making a difference. But I also think it can get people distracted. I think our communicators, unfortunately, spend far too much time focused on click rates and distribution numbers. And that is also not necessarily the most useful, important measure of our impact. And so I would much rather see companies take the real action to get their leaders, push them to clarity and alignment, push to get the stories and strategies in place to sustain culture, and the success will follow. I love working with an organization that has great methods for measuring, but not all companies have the capability to do that. And I don't think that's a reason to say we can't do anything.
Yeah, well, it's such a good point too of like, could we measure that? And it's like, it is possible, but your
Yes.
infrastructure is not set up in such a way that makes sense. And I also think, we've had some interesting conversations with previous guests about this around data, and thinking about metrics are a representation of something that's actually more important. It's not the metric
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
I think sometimes the the what feels so tangible about quantitative data can almost lead us to sort of like disbelieve our eyes or our experience,
Yes.
right? And when
Yes.
we're talking about this influence, like qualitative, again, like vibes is not a dismissive way of feeling what's
Right.
going on
Right. Right.
in an organization. That's maybe a kind of just like slang, very off the cuff way of describing it. But what do you see? What do you observe? What do you experience? Those are data points too. And the other thing I'm thinking about, recently had a conversation with Keith Berman, who is in internal comms. And one of the things we talked about is sometimes one of the measurement challenges is that you're almost trying to avoid the 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 negative outcome. So it's like, this person made a
Yes.
right decision in their job because they felt values aligned. How do you measure something bad didn't happen? How do
Right.
you measure they took that extra step of
Exactly.
compliance, or
Exactly.
they went out of their way to help a customer because the culture is strong and things didn't go awry? That's really hard to get
Exactly.
a read on.
It's very
Impossible.
hard. It's
Yeah.
very hard to quantify. And again, I think people can get stuck in a loop of, I can't do this thing if I don't know exactly how I'm going to measure it. And I'm such a big believer in progress over perfection. Do the thing, make some changes, change one thing. And we'll worry about measuring it later. But if so many organizations and leaders get so hung up and end up getting frozen and not doing anything, I would much rather see people make some changes, and the business results will follow.
Yeah.
They really will.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I'm going to shift us now. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, to our lightning round section called The Last Word. So every guest gets these same 5 questions. Just go with your gut on these answers. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. I love
Okay.
this part.
Question 1: what's your favorite word to say out loud?
It has to be magnanimous. I don't say it nearly enough, but it just feels so good coming off your mouth. Magnanimous. But I also love what it means. It actually means having a great soul. And I just think
Does
that's
it
such a
really?
beautiful, yes, isn't that such a beautiful, it's something about the Latin magnanimous, but it's a great soul. And I just think that's a beautiful meaning and a beautiful word.
That's awesome. What's a word you know from reading, but you're not quite sure how to pronounce it?
This was a harder one for me. It's a word that I actually do say often, and I think there's multiple ways to pronounce it, but it's niche or niche.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I prefer niche. Every once in a while I say niche. I'm always a little nervous to say it. Sometimes I just swallow it
We were
because I
talking
never
before about
know.
like,
Yeah.
niche.
Niche.
Small nook for my business.
Exactly. I like that. That one you can't mispronounce.
Exactly. What's a phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Oh man, this was a hard one because your guests have come up with all the great phrases that I hate. I think one word that still irks me is when people refer to a group of people as guys. Hey guys, let's do this. Guys, let's do that. As you know, as a woman, as a company that is comprised primarily of women, it just kind of irks me. I also grew up in Texas, and I think y'all is the most inclusive and useful word. So I would like to campaign for retiring guys and replacing it with y'all.
Y'all. Everywhere, y'all.
Hey, y'all.
I admit I grew up with guys and I still will use it kind of in my family, but I do think about it. Sometimes I say folks.
Folks is more inclusive.
I have
I
not
just,
gone y'all, but I've
yeah,
been back in Florida a year and a half, so I mean it's possible, you know.
it's a great word, Kristen. Once you jump on the y'all bandwagon, it's hard to get off.
I love that. What's a communication practice or principle that's non-negotiable for you?
I think it has been from the start of my career. It's that managers are the most important piece in any sort of communication strategy. You've got to go to the manager. If a company has limited budget, limited resources, I always say the number one thing to focus on is the people manager. They matter more than anything.
Nice. Shout out to managers.
Yep.
And the last one, what's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that really stuck with you?
We won't go down the rabbit hole of watching because I can talk about my binging habits for a whole other
Maybe
hour.
once we conclude the podcast, we can go.
Exactly. Exactly. But I am a huge fan of Brene Brown. I love her most recent book, Strong Ground, which is not only her perspectives on leadership, but she brings in a lot of other voices as well. And the thing that really stuck with me about that book is that leadership requires bravery. And it's all about bravery. And I think it's something that should be required reading for any leader at any level. So that's basically all of us.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great recommendation. And I couldn't agree more. Tying back to your conversation about things are not comfortable right now. Um, and to kind of forge forward regardless of that feeling of discomfort. I do think about it as a bit of a crucible, right? That maybe we're going to emerge stronger and hardened in a good way.
Exactly. Let's hope so.
Awesome. And this has been such a great conversation. If our listeners or watchers want to learn more about you, what are the best places for them to find you?
Sure. Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can find me at thinkbink.com. So it's thinkbink, BINK.com. And if you do /podcasts, you can go to a page that has all kinds of information about how to sign up for our newsletter, how to connect with me on LinkedIn, and just get some of our most useful resources. Our website has tons of different white papers and resources to help organizations as they're navigating these big cultural challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, you've got tons of stuff on there, so definitely folks should check that out. Folks, y'all should check that out.
There you go. Welcome to the bandwagon.
Thank you so much, Anne. Great chatting with you today.
Thank you, Kristen. I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.